It is now 6 o'clock and time to call the City of Oak Harbor Planning Commission regular meeting to order. June 28, 2022. Due to COVID-19, this will be both a physical meeting location and a virtual meeting per Washington Proclamation 20-28. Meeting may be viewed live via YouTube. To leave a public comment that will be made part of the meeting record, you may attend in person or please call and leave a message at 360-279-4512 no later than 5 p.m. the day prior. The first item on the agenda this evening is roll call. Let the record show that Commissioners Freeman and Shazar are absent. Second item on the agenda is the approval of the May 24, 2022 regular meeting minutes. Do I have a motion?
I'd like to make a motion to correct the minutes from Dennis Kuhl, Senior Planner, to Dennis Lefevre, Senior Planner.
All in favor? Aye.
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 Now we need to have a motion to approve the minutes.
Motion to approve the minutes.
I will second.
Aye.
Aye.
Motion
Aye.
passes. Third item on the agenda is public comment. And since there is no one here representing the public, nor have we had any comments called in, we'll go on to the next item. The next item is the public meetings and hearings. And the first of those is a public meeting, Commission Bylaw review brought to us by Director David Kuhl. David?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission. Tonight, we'd like to take a look at the Oak Harbor Planning Commission bylaws. The City Council has asked all the boards and commissions in the city to review their bylaws and update them and bring them back to the council before the end of the year. So we're getting a good early start on this. And so tonight, there'll be no decision made on it. We just want to review it for the first time with you. The nature of it is, this document is quite old. The last time it was updated was the early 1980s. And so there's obviously a lot of outdated information in here. Whereas we've changed the way we do business as a planning commission and using a hearing examiner process. So a lot of the steps that are still in here are processes that are tied to something we don't do anymore. So Sarah and I have gone through this document, and we can just scroll through it as you see fit and talk about some of these highlights, and then you can maybe make notes and have conversation about it all you want. But we'll bring it back at a future meeting and talk about it again. So this first page is page 11 of 39 in the PC packet. And so you should have that available to you on your iPads. So the first section is purpose and objectives. And you'll see that under section C, just to get started, it says to review all annexation and zoning applications. So we've crossed out and zoning because you don't do zoning applications anymore. You just do long-range planning, which is basically code changes and comp plan amendments. And sitting here thinking about it, we might need to take out annexation because I don't think the Planning Commission reviews annexations either. But these are things to think about as we go through here. Subsection D, you can see we've taken out all the language there about plan development applications. That's not something the Planning Commission does anymore. Subsection F, to review subdivision plats. Again, Planning Commission doesn't do that anymore. Under subsection G, we've highlighted it to give you an idea of some of the detail that you used to look at, specifically regarding roads and details to streets, various tools of review that you did on projects where you might still do some of that when you're doing text amendments. It's really not necessary anymore to have G in there. So we'd like you to review that and tell us what you think. Scrolling down to the next page, looks like page 12 of 39. Under membership and voting, subsection 3, you can see we've highlighted the words "and leave the room." So this is a section under 3 where we're talking about if you feel like you have a conflict of interest, you need to step down from being part of a decision, and in the old days, you had to leave the room. So we're asking you how you feel about that. Is that still necessary? Or would somebody be able to recuse themselves and sit at the dais and continue to just listen? So that's something for you to think about. Further down the list, we have a start time for the meetings of the commission is now 6 o'clock instead of 7:30. So that's a change we already know about. Subsection 2, we talk about a simple majority of the quorum present is required for subdivisions and other matters. Of course, we don't do subdivisions anymore, so that could be updated. Next page, 13 of 39, you look at subsection 4. It's highlighted in yellow. It says a member who misses more than 3 consecutive meetings without having a given leave of absence by the mayor is automatically removed from the commission. So in red, we've said, are there any thoughts on updating or changing this? Below that, under subsection 6, notice of meetings where action is to be taken for a zone change. Typically, a zone change might be for an area-wide zoning change that might come to the Planning Commission, but not a site-specific zone change. So we've crossed out the words planned unit development as well because we don't do those anymore. Subsection 7, again, we ask about first hearing on a zoning issue. And we don't really have zoning issues per se, unless you were to constitute a zoning text amendment, that could be possibly counted towards that. And let me know if we're going too fast or too slow, whatever you like, whatever pace you'd like. On page 13 again, under number 4, Planning Commission discussion and action. Highlighted in yellow, we say the Planning Commission has an obligation to be as clear and simple as in this procedure as possible, therefore should avoid invoking the finer points of parliamentary rules, which may only serve to obscure the issues and arouse the suspicion of the audience. So we could probably just switch that to Robert's Rules or something like that we currently use. So that's just for your consideration. Authority of the chairman under subsection 1 on the same page 13. They have the word committee there and you're a commission, so that's pretty easy to change. Following on page 14, we have conducting the hearing. And a lot of the detail in this hearing is as though you are still going through a process like you used to do of a lot of detailed questions and answers back and forth. This is all handled by the hearing examiner now. So these are steps that could be eliminated or certainly revised. Under 4, it says staff briefly introduces the proposal, a limit of 2 minutes. And so that's something you'd probably want to update. And we leave that to you to guide us a little bit.
David,
Yes.
you know, we haven't really had any because of COVID, basically, when we went to the hearing examiner. So in the future, is there really going to be a lot of public comment? Because most of the public comment was, I know it's something we need to offer, but most of the public comment had to do with, I hate to use the word controversial, but two-sided issues that now we aren't even going to be dealing with. What is your thought on that?
Well, I think you're right. A lot of the day-to-day projects that used to come to you could certainly generate a lot more traffic. And there could be a lot of interest perhaps from somebody on one particular text amendment you might be making. So that is still possible, but a lot of our items are a little more routine and certainly require dialogue and debate, so it's still an open public hearing in that case.
But I believe, I think we had a case where we had the comprehensive plan update, and we got quite a lot of people in talking about drainage issues and that kind of issues, so I was kind of surprised. Then they didn't come to the council. It was kind of interesting how sometimes they come here, but they didn't go there, so, that was the exception, but I do remember that fairly recently.
Interesting. So there's a lot of different reasons why we do what we do.
I was just thinking that in regards to the verbiage here with what we're looking at. Thank you.
Number 7, the chairman asks the commission if they have any questions to ask either party. Well, that would be as though it were in the old situation where you have proponents and opponents. Under the next section that we have highlighted for you, and again, you can go through this in more detail on your own time. All we've really done is change the chairman to Greg Wassinger and updated the date on the last page, which is 16 of 39. So if you would do us a favor and take a look at it between now and the next time we talk about it and give us your ideas, we'd appreciate that. And we look forward to updating these bylaws to become more current with what we actually do.
Thank you for that overview. I've been on the commission for almost a year now, and it would be really helpful to get a sense of what processes or essentially democratic kind of oversight processes on planning that have moved away from the commission and become part of professional staff or the hearing examiner versus what is in our scope now. And I would also just say that maybe now is a good time with the bylaws being potentially revised to also consider something in our meeting rules around the amount of time that commissioners should have with a full agenda and notes on that agenda prior to a meeting. Maybe see if there are ways that we can integrate more public process. I think we all notice that we haven't seen much of the public lately. I don't think that that's all on the public. I think that may mean that we need improved processes to engage the public in planning decision-making and get their feedback. So what are things we can put into our bylaws that will be supportive of that long-term? Thanks.
Thank you,
Sarah.
Commissioner Schott. Appreciate that. I wrote those notes down, and we'll take that up. Mr. Chairman?
Yes. Thank you, David. If we have any other comments, okay. Chairman Palmer?
Thank you, Mr. Cool. I just wanted to ask, while we're reviewing this, should we also be bringing back potential additions? Like, for example, I know you mentioned this hasn't been updated till the 80s, or since the 80s. That immediately makes me think maybe one of the things in here should be that it's got a 5-year review or to those matters. So when we come back, should we be bringing some potential additions for recommendation, or are you wanting us to just look at what's within the scope of what's here?
Thank you. I think it probably would make sense if you want to bring back changes that you recommend. That's your role, I believe, in the Planning Commission world. So, yes, if you have some suggested additions, certainly bring those back to us, and as a commission, you'll consider that.
Thank you for that.
Any other comment for David? Okay, thank you, David, for your input. And we will take it up at probably the next meeting. The next item on the agenda this evening is 2022 comp plan amendments. This is also a public meeting, and Senior Planner Kak Kamak will take us through this. Kak?
Thank you, Chairman. Good evening. Kak Kamak, Principal Planner, here to present the 2022 Comprehensive Plan amendments. It's an ongoing discussion. We've discussed this topic at the last Planning Commission meeting, and I have a slideshow to kind of quickly go over what we covered at the last meeting and then kind of flow into some topics that we want to cover at this meeting. So I'm going to share my screen. All right. I hope you can see that. I'm just going to go off of the kind of working slideshow here, so you can see my slides on the side here, and that's fine. Switching it sometimes creates some technical difficulty, so I hope you can kind of read this main slide here, which is what we'll focus on. To kind of go over just a refresher, what's on the 2022 docket, we have the housing element that's still open, and we have some funding for that, some grant funding. So we'll see some movement on this later this year. We have the JPA, UGA ongoing discussion. I think the Planning Commission is aware that the City Council recently had a discussion on that related to some development easements and grant money related to that. So that's still a hot topic, and we're in continuous conversations with the county on it. We have the transportation element, which is the active transportation plan. That's also in full swing. We're actually interviewing consultants actually this week to get that process started. We have the capital improvements plan. This is an annual ongoing discussion, and we will be talking about that internally as staff, preparing for the budget starting probably in July and August. So that's coming up very soon as well. And then one of the major topics of discussion today and last week at the last month meeting was the land use element and some of the changes and the corrections that we want to do to the future land use map. So we touched upon these at the last meeting a little bit. We talked about some of the errors in the future land use map, and I'll go over this a little more in detail in the next few slides on the planned residential estate not being correctly designated. We also chatted a little bit about trying to simplify our development regulations, and we can start by reducing the planned industrial park and planned business park designations, kind of collapse it into the industrial designation. We chatted about that a little bit at the last meeting. And then we have some land use anomalies in Oak Harbor to talk about, and we'll go over that topic as well. Land use anomalies, when I talk about them, they're just inconsistent between the land use map and the zoning map. That's what the anomalies are, and I'll kind of go over that a little bit. So we'll talk about addressing some of those and changing some of those potentially this year. Normally we would have sponsored amendments, and this year we don't have any. So that's currently on this year's docket, full docket, a lot of things going on. Just to give you a 30,000-foot level on what we're trying to do with the land use map amendment and where it stands generally in the overall plan versus implementation kind of a flow chart. So, the vision and the goals and policies are on the comp plan, so are the land use map and sub-area plan. So these are all policy documents. And then the zoning map and the development regulations are your implementation documents. What we're discussing today are mainly policy changes. And so the changes that we're discussing is to the land use map. We're not discussing any changes to the zoning map today with the discussion. Changes to the zoning is a different process, and currently it goes through the hearing examiner process. So we are not going to try and go into that. There are circumstances where we can potentially consider zoning changes along with land use, but currently in the items that we're tracking, what we want to tackle is mainly just the land use map designation, and that's just the policy level and not at the implementation level. So any changes we make here, we're hoping that it doesn't impact anything on the property as it is today. So that's the idea. So that's kind of an important note to keep in mind. So the land use element, what are some of the topics that we want to try and cover in that? We want to again change or correct some of the errors. As I mentioned, planned residential estate. This is a designation that currently there's no properties in the city that's zoned for planned residential estate. But if properties are annexed from the county, we want that designation to remain, and I'll show you the area where we want that to be changed and corrected. This was just an error. When we did the 2016 update, we updated our map, we transferred data, and in some of that, we some of the parcels got misdesignated, and that's what we're trying to change. We talked a little bit about the land use trim, about collapsing the districts, and I'll kind of touch upon that a little bit today as well. And then the land use anomaly. So these are the things that we want to try and do tonight, or at least discuss. So we'll talk about go back one more slide to the land use trim. So the planned industrial park and planned business park designation. So we have in our comprehensive plan, we have the industrial land use. The industrial land use is implemented by 3 zoning districts: planned industrial park, planned business park, and then we have an industrial zoning district. So there are 3 zoning districts. What we have found over the years is that the planned business park and the planned industrial park were specifically written, I think probably in the 80s or 90s, very targeted towards a very specific type of development. And the process for those development includes lengthy documents and lengthy hearings. And we found that nobody has taken advantage of these processes, and some of these lands have not been developed, maybe because of the process. So we looked into it and thought, well, these land uses are no different than industrial uses, what are in the industrial district. We have, over the years, adopted design guidelines and site development regulations that can handle a lot of these design issues that were not maybe available in the 80s and 90s. And so these 2 districts can be basically collapsed into one zoning district. And that makes it simple and easy for everybody. So this is something that starts at the policy level. And again, we're not changing any of the uses per se on the property, just starting with the land use, and then once it's done in the land use, we'll have to think about how the zoning map will have to be changed. But it starts with the policy of simplifying. And so that's kind of what we're, looking at here. So what would be the impacts if we did that? What would happen to all the uses? So I'm going to show you a quick table to show you the layout of the uses and then the 5 uses that are really impacted if we do collapse it. So I'm going to show you, I'll bring it to the screen. Can you see a spreadsheet? If you guys can see it, just give me a nod. Okay, spreadsheet. Okay, good, thank you. So these are our permitted use table. I've simplified it in the spreadsheet. PVP, PIP, and industrial. And these are the uses. P is for permitted, C is for conditional. And as you can see, there's a lot of uses in the industrial, and most of the uses in the PIP and PVP are kind of subsets. They're already permitted in the industrial, and they're just kind of subcategories of the industrial. So you can bump up most of these to the industrial category without any issues, really, any impacts. But there are some uses, for example, hotels, motels, and I know this is probably a little small, so I'll make it a little big. There you go. So there are some uses like the hotel, motel, which is allowed in the PBP, but is not permitted in the PIP and the I district. And so there are some uses that are, that we may have to discuss. So what are the uses? So without going too much into this, I'm going to remove that and come back to this presentation, come back to this table. So basically there are 5 uses if we collapse them that are really impacted, and how should they be changed? So we have equipment rental that's conditioned in PIP and permitted in P in the industrial. The proposal would be to just allow it as a permitted use because industrial is a higher impact use. Now, if the commission feels like they should be conditional uses, we can change them. This is really, we're trying to make it easy for property to develop and to make it simple. So we're trying to be a little relaxed here. Hotel, motel is permitted in the PVP. It's not permitted in the PIP and I. So if you collapse all of it, is a motel and hotel a good use in the industrial district? And so I have a question. Should it be conditional or should it just be not allowed at all? So it's a choice that we can chat about. What are the impacts of having a hotel and a motel in an industrial district? So these are the policy things that we can talk about. Caretakers' quarters, again, they're permitted in the PVP, PIP, they're conditioned in the industrial, and therefore they can stay conditional in the industrial. Same as vocational and warehousing, they're permitted here, and so they're not permitted in the industrial, but if you collapse them, because they're already permitted uses, you can just either permit them or you can put them as conditional. Again, like I said, we're just trying to promote development and promote more opportunity. So the proposed change, at least from staff perspective, is to permit most of these. The caretakers is conditional. Hotel, motel is either conditional or not permitted. I mean, and the commission can discuss and give me some feedback on that. That will be helpful. So that's one topic that we can talk about, and we can come back to that, or we can discuss it right now. So I'll stop my conversation briefly for a moment just to get thoughts. If we want to discuss this at the end of my presentation, we can do that. If we want to discuss it now, we can talk about that now.
Commissioner, do you have any comments now? Would you like questions, talk about it?
Thank you, Mr. Kamak. Just so I'm clear, if we were to remove the hotel and motel from this, where would it go?
Well, good question. Motel and hotels are permitted in other zoning districts. So they are permitted in the C3 district, they're permitted in the C1 district, I think. So there are other districts where they are permitted. So it's not like we don't have a place for them. It's just whether they are suitable for this particular district. Most of our industrial zoning is north of 16th Avenue. It's in high noise zones and it's closer to the base. And so whether it's an appropriate use there or not. We've had conversations with the Navy in the past, and I'm talking maybe 4 or 5 years ago, about whether they consider hotels and motels an appropriate use north of 16th. In fact, do they consider it like a residential or not? And the base was okay with hotels and motels. They didn't think that that would fall under the same category as residential. They didn't want long-term stay, but a hotel or a motel they were okay with. So I was being a little conservative on that aspect of it, and put an X there to say and ask the question, should we even permit this? But it can be a conditional use as well.
Thank you for that.
Thank you,
Oh, go
Jack. Yeah, I had a couple questions. So one, it seems odd to me to have hotels or motels in an industrial zone. It seems like it would be a broader benefit to the Oak Harbor economy to centralize that resource so that more tourists are getting out and shopping, and discovering more of Oak Harbor and not just sleeping somewhere for the night and heading out, I would be interested in exploring not having that in the industrial zone. And then a question I had was on merging the two industrial categories. I'd be curious to know, and I don't need an answer here, but I'd be curious to know if there are any industrial uses that are in either category that would have an environmental health impact, and I'm talking more of like human environmental health impact, that we have had categorized in a certain section at one point. So like, gosh, I'm trying to think of an example of this. Like, there've been industrial stained glass companies that are in other communities where they were zoned in a certain area, and it was later discovered that they off-gas these toxic chemicals into the neighborhood around them. So I'm kind of wondering, like, are there things that we have placed in one of these particular industrial areas to sort of isolate human impact? And if we spread it to both zones, would we be inadvertently spreading human impact? Maybe that's not the case, but it would be nice to know if there's any of those in the mix that we would be inadvertently causing, having issues where we don't want issues. Thanks, CAC.
Yes, good point, and I just want to bring up a couple of things related to that. One is we have sections in all of the zoning codes, and if we collapse the PVP and PIP into the industrial, some of these will remain or in place, is conditions related to uses. And even in the industrial district, there are specific conditions to say, you shouldn't have byproducts, of a certain kind, or you cannot emit, noxious vapor into, there's conditions already in our industrial district that regulate that. That's one kind of aspect of it. And then there's also any development that goes through a permit with the city has to do a SEPA checklist and go through a determination. And that's another venue where through development review that you get to apply all the codes, Washington state codes, the city codes, to make sure that environmental impacts are minimized as best as possible. So even though they're industrial, it doesn't mean that the rules are relaxed and that they can do whatever. So there are levels of regulation, but it'll be good to take a look at the use, like you say, and make sure that we're not creating a problem.
Commissioners, any other comments, questions? I'm sure there'll be others down the road, but for now, we're good.
Yeah. I will continue. I've got a few more things to chat about. Thank you. That was very good. So we can pause occasionally since we've already started that habit, and I'll pause for questions and we can discuss that.
Excuse me,
format.
CAC. Excuse me. Blaine would like to enter.
Yeah, just to kind of elaborate on what CAC's comment with regulatory agencies and with doing the SEPA. If they were doing air issues, then the Air Quality Board would regulate them. So, and so ecology and so other state agencies or sub-agencies regulate and deal with those issues and kind of catch some of those issues that we may not have the capacity to environmentally do the regulation or the oversight on.
Thank you, Blaine.
All right. Thanks,
CAC,
Blaine.
okay, go ahead, CAC. Sorry.
Thank you. All right, so jumping to land use anomalies. Land use anomalies are, as I mentioned, you have the land use map and the zoning map, and you want those to be consistent with each other. You want the zoning map to be implementing what the future land use map has. However, there are inconsistencies between the zoning and the land use map, and some of them may be because of time, and some of them may be because of design to leave them in a certain way, and some of them may be just errors. So there are many reasons why we have these anomalies. If they are by design, they are usually to promote change. So, for example, you may have a property that is currently having a single-family home, but is located along a street that has, offices or other commercial or sometimes even industrial uses. And the other uses may be the more dominant use in that area. And so over time, you want that single-family home to redevelop into more consistent uses for safety reasons mainly, and not have somebody live there under surrounded by impacts, maybe noise or other kinds. So by design, some of these inconsistencies are there, and we have some of those in our map, and I will show you those, and I don't think we should necessarily change those. And most of these by design are that the land use is providing a bigger opportunity, in the sense the current zoning is being underutilized, and the land use is providing for a greater use of that property. So basically, whatever the property is being currently used as can continue to be used as long as they can. They can redevelop that and reuse it for that use as long as they want. However, the land use gives them, if they want to redevelop it, a new owner comes in and wants to redevelop it and wants to have a higher yield or higher use for that property, the land use map provides that opportunity. So it provides for opportunities and increases redevelopment. So by design, there are some in there, and I think we should just leave those as is. However, there are some errors, and those are mainly because of the 2016 data conversions. We're finding them out as we implement and get questions and so on. So change some of those. And then there are some anomalies, just really unclear on how it happened. It could be an error, and maybe we should consider changing it. So these are the things we're going to quickly look at. Now, in the Planning Commission packet, I've included some maps. They try to just locate the properties. I think I included a land use map and a zoning map. They located the properties just to show where these properties are that are inconsistent. And let's go over the ones that we want to change tonight. So this is one of the maps that indicates where the properties are that are inconsistent. So the ones that are in red, staff is recommending that we don't do anything to this inconsistency, because we think that it is by design. And some of them, a couple of them, the ones that if you can see me move my cursor, are associated with church properties. And church properties are kind of a unique use that could be used in different ways. And so some of these properties are zoned in one way and the land use is in another, so that if a church wants to use their property in different ways, they can choose to do so by rezoning it. But it also accommodates some anomalies like a residential unit that goes along with the church. And they want to associate that residential unit more as with the church than it is as a single family residential. So some of these have been zoned public facilities, which is what accommodates churches. R1 low density does too, but so does public facilities, and half the churches in Oak Harbor are zoned public facilities and half the churches are zoned R1, and I have no idea why, but that's what creates some of the inconsistencies. But I think some of it is by design, and I think we can leave some of those as is. There are some, however, that are errors, and that's the ones that are shown in green here. And these were errors, I think, because when we changed the map and we went from CAD maps to GIS maps, we had to do a lot of polygon adjusting, and I think some of those may have been miscolored or misrepresented when we did that, and they're just plain errors, and I think they could be changed. So what are the ones that that we think could be changed, and we'll go into it a little more. So we have on the land use map, one of the changes that we should consider is this area that is on Oak Harbor Road, and this is Gun Club Road, right by the new Harbor Heights property. So all of this property is currently in the county, and they are north of 16th Street, and they have residences on them. And there was a special designation that was created just to address properties like this, and it was called Planned Residential Estate. And this Planned Residential Estate is a land use and a zoning designation. Currently, there's no property in the city with this, but if this property does get annexed into the city, that's what it should be zoned. It should be zoned Planned Residential Estate. However, this got designated as low-density residential in the land use map, and that's just an error, like I said. And this just needs to be corrected on our map. So that is one of the changes that we're recommending that we consider this year with the amendments. We also have, this is Barrington Drive. This is, Walmart and Safeway. And as you drive up the hill, you go, past the top. And as you drive on the left side, there's a little neighborhood that has duplexes and fourplexes. And they are zoned R4 appropriately for the density. But the land use is given as low density. And that, again, I think is just because of all the proximity of all the colors and the polygons. I think that was an error in the 2016 map. And so we can change that to high intensity residential, which will accommodate the current zoning, and therefore that'll make it consistent and correct that error. The same concept applies for this property as well. This is at the end of Whidbey Avenue and Heller. And again, there's a little loop here which has some duplexes on there. Again, this is zoned R4, but was designated as low density residential. Again, we think it's an error and, can be converted to high intensity residential, low impact commercial. So this is really not an inconsistency. This is more of an anomaly. So this is on Heller and Crosby. This is the North Whidbey Fire Station. And the North Whidbey Fire Station is zoned or designated low density residential. And again, not sure why that's the case. It's also zoned R1, and not sure why that is either. So this is really an anomaly, but I think it is better served for the fire station for them to be in public facilities. having them in the R1 or the low density zoning really restricts them from considering changes or improvements to their facility. And I think being in the public facilities district will give them an option to invest in that area a little longer to serve that area. So this is truly an anomaly and not really clear why the land use and the zoning has this designated as low density. So this is something that at least at the land use level, we can change it, and then the property owner can rezone it or upzone it when they so desire, or even the city can do that. And so this is one of the last ones I have for you today to consider changing or for changes. And this is on Northeast 7th Avenue. This is Highway 20, and this is Northeast Harvest. And the two corner properties along Northeast 7th is designated as low density residential. Now, there are existing single family homes on there, and but the zoning on this property is RO. And so I think the intent is for these properties all along here, Northeast 7th, to maybe slowly convert over time, again, maybe by design, to a higher intensity and take advantage of the Northeast 7th Avenue access there. And so, it'd be good to consider this to change that again to what the surrounding property is. This darker yellow is the HIRLIC, and so make it consistent with that. And so these are the properties that we identified as something that could benefit from change. And this correction will help. We don't want to necessarily fight fires. When we get calls from these property owners and they want to do something, we want to have it corrected so that we're not correcting it based on something that they want to do and cause delays and things. So we're trying to be proactive here and get a little ahead and correct these changes so that there are no errors on our maps. So that is what I have for you today. This is just for discussion, no action. Any questions on any of these land use discussions? I can go back to any of these slides to facilitate discussion. Back to the commission.
Commissioners, any questions for CAC?
CAC, so 2016 was when this map changed over from CAD to GIS. Is there a listing of what these zones were at that time? Is it just putting them back to what they were, or are we changing what the original zones were?
We believe most of these changes we're doing is to put them back to where they were. So we have the old maps. So we actually had them as PDFs. We didn't even have CAD, GIS, and they were all color blocks and things like that. So they were not attached to the actual property. So when we made the shift, we had to shift blocks to property data. And so I think that's where the confusion happened.
Thank you.
Any other questions, comments? Hearing none, I'll say thank you.
Thank you.
Principal Planner Kamak. And now
Thank you very much.
we'll go on to the third item on the agenda this evening, the CAO amendments. And this is a public meeting also. And Senior Planner Dennis Lefebvre will help us with this program. Dennis?
I will. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members of the Commission, good evening. Dave mentioned some of the functions of the Planning Commission, and one of the key functions, I think, is to review recommended code amendments, which is our regulatory document. The Planning Commission takes a gives us key inputs as far as changes and revisions that we propose to you folks and then carry on to the city council. Tonight, we are looking at a couple of code amendments that we are proposing, and I'll walk you through with the PowerPoint presentation. And I am going to do the full screen. It is involving the critical areas ordinance, but it also, as you will see, involves a number of other sections of our municipal code. And I want to take you back a little ways for some of you members of the commission who may not be familiar with the effort that we engaged in a couple of years ago to do what was considered a periodic review of our Shoreline Master Program. We worked on this effort for a couple of years, and through many, many meetings with the Planning Commission and City Council, we actually updated our master program and had that adopted last June of 2021. The required steps which we needed to engage in this effort involved ensuring that the new program was consistent with our local plans and regulations, the comprehensive plan, as CAC was talking about, regulations as part of our Oak Harbor Municipal Code. We also needed to ensure that the new program incorporated updates to the Shoreline Management Act, as well as Department of Ecology rule amendments, and include new information or anything that may have changed locally or any improved data that we may have secured since the previous version, which was actually in 2013. So that 8-year span is what we were looking at. We did receive funding to undergo this effort for the periodic review, and we used those funds to look at a portion of our shoreline which is quite sensitive actually because of the synergy between the shoreline and the development, and that's along the Scenic Heights Street. It's the Residential Bluff Conservancy designation in our Shoreline Master Program. We use those funds to have a study done to show what impacts some of our regulatory requirements had, as well as some of the policy statements that we were making in our Shoreline Master Program, and make sure they worked together to preserve that sensitive area of the bluff. We did have the study prepared by Coastal Geologic Services. I included that as attachment 1 to your packet. And it was a very well done document and identified some recommendations for us to carry forward, not only in the Shoreline Master Program, but they also identified some revisions that we could make to our municipal code. We did incorporate some of the high and moderate priority recommendations into the Shoreline Master Program. And now it's time that we look into our municipal code to make sure that we're consistent with our regulatory document and the Shoreline Master Program regulations. The study identified a couple of revisions that we wanted to definitely carry forward into the municipal code. And it was basically 2 set areas that we wanted to look at. The one area that definitely was a key highlight for this study was the setback of primary structures from the top of the bluff. We had in our code a setback of 25 feet, and the recommendation from this study, which represents best available science, which is an important statement for the state agencies, to 50 feet. And that was based on the study that this firm engaged in to look at the sea level impacts on the bluff, the toe of the bluff, and the recession of the bluff over time. So considering that by 2100, based on his recommendations, the bluff potentially could recede approximately 30 feet. So that's the reason why we are looking at increasing the setback of a primary structure to 50 feet. Decks and accessory buildings still could be a little bit closer because they typically place less stress on the foundation. And also, there would be no impact to existing structures. If there's a house right now that's within the 50 feet, we're not going to ask them to move the house. But this would be for undeveloped properties that would be looking at placing a house, or possibly even a redevelopment situation. So again, this is one portion of the municipal code that we were looking at, and that portion actually comes up in the Title 20 of our municipal code, which is our environmental title, and is in Chapter 20.28, which deals, of course, with the geologically hazardous areas. I have this as a attachment 2, which shows a strike-through and underlined version of what our recommended changes would be. And in fact, that's the only section in our code that addresses the setback from this top of a steep bluff. The other basic area that we're looking at is one that we don't really address in the Shoreline Master Program, but the study did identify this as a kind of an anomaly, using a term from CAC. And that is where a person who owns a lot that is actually encompassed in the tidelands, they could use that tideland portion to transfer density to the upland portion and create a higher density development in their situation. We don't think that's really a good idea because it does create a higher density on the upland portion. It creates additional stresses for the bluff environment. The author of the study, Jim Johannesson, indicated that that's a highly unusual situation. I have not seen it basically in any other community that has a shoreline issue or a tideland issue. And also, by removing that portion of the code, it would be consistent with Island and Jefferson counties. That actually reverberates through a number of different sections in our code. And again, our attachment 2 identifies each of those sections. And then again, with strike through underline, identifies how we are proposing to change that portion of the code. As I mentioned, the Planning Commission plays a key role in review of municipal code amendments. As you see here, this is a process 5, and it does require a public hearing before the Planning Commission. You will be making a recommendation that I will take forward to the City Council. And through the various steps of this process, tonight's basically the first touch for you folks. You have another month to take a look at this and certainly ask me any questions that you may have before I bring it back. But we also have a mandatory 60-day notice to the Department of Commerce for any code amendments. We have the SEPA review period, which will open this review up to certain members of the public. We will be presenting this to the City Council at a July 20th workshop, bring it back to you folks July 26th for the public hearing, where I hope you will be making a recommendation. And then we'll finish this up in September with a public hearing with the City Council, where normally they will adopt these regulations. So that's this presentation in a nutshell. I would be happy to answer any questions you may have on this.
Do we have any questions, commissioners?
Thank you for that presentation, Dave. I had a couple of questions. One, could you, for our benefit, define the term ordinary high watermark in just kind of plain English? What are we talking about there when we're using that term throughout the document?
That is usually where the high tide line comes along the shoreline. There are certain extreme measures where that doesn't enter into the, well, that's why it's called ordinary. They take the king tides and the extreme low tides, and it's basically the normal high water mark when there's a high tide.
Okay, thanks. And in the study that you cited, that the city had done, that by 2100, the bluffs could recede by 30 feet is the projection. And in current homes certainly wouldn't have to move. They'd be grandfathered in. But I'm wondering, does the knowledge of this potential erosion need to be notified to potential buyers? Like, is that something that the city should require? Or if we know that there's a problem there, and those are the estimates for folks who are considering purchasing on the bluff, how do we handle that? Essentially, now knowing those projections, and I'd be interested in hearing another conversation or questions about other projections that they had for sea level over that same time period. Thanks.
Yeah, that's a very good question, and I'll take a first stab at it, but anybody else may enter into the answer as well. But I would assume that a realtor who may be wanting to look to sell a property that's on a bluff and affected by our critical areas should be aware of those. I know that's a big should, but they should be aware of the changes that we're making and also aware of the increased setback. So as far as the sea level rise projection, that's an issue. I don't know if they legally have to disclose, but again, I welcome anybody else's comment on this.
Yeah. Chair?
Yes.
Yeah, I can probably add to it. I think the avenue here for the regulation is when they go and do the preliminary review and do the actual putting in the property. And then that's what it triggers. When they actually do the proposal, then it triggers the shoreline. And that's when we would do our diligence there and do the regulations and implement the setback. But certainly, we don't have control because we don't really know on the purchase side what people are going to do with it, but certainly people call our staff all the time when they're purchasing property, and staff are very good on providing the information to them to help them kind of generalize what the restrictions were for the property, and it's real common for us to answer those questions. And I think staff would certainly tell them about the 50-foot setback from the bluff and those kind of things, but it would be a hard regulation when you implement this. And I think this is a good avenue in that way to give a little bit more leeway there, but it is kind of scary that potential there of losing the bluff, and there's some areas where it just, and we dealt with this with a current development right now in Scenic Heights and had to kind of deal with this issue. So in the 4 years I've been here, it was really a big deal, and we had to kind of deal with it on that because there's a lot of uncertainty there, and the geologists, they don't know. So sometimes it recedes, but we try to do our best and try to be reasonable here. And that's the whole generation of this topic, was to take a look at it and to deal with it a little bit differently and a little bit more conservatively.
Well, also I'd like to interject, as I understood it, that the project, the groundwater from Scenic Heights area coming down has created some unstable situations, and engineering has come up with plans that are fairly extensive to decrease that groundwater issue. But even so, there are homes on Scenic Heights right now, and I think Sarah might be referring to buying a home that's like 5 feet from the bluff. There are homes like that right now. I mean, less than 5 feet. In fact, I convinced my wife otherwise to not purchase one of those because of its instability. And there's nothing we can do about that going forward. All we can hope for is to control additional remodeling, tear downs and rebuilds. And I know there's issues, but there are conditions. There's footprints that have to be followed, and there's a lot of regulations in place today that weren't there 10 years ago. Or 15 years ago. So, yeah. Any other comments for Dennis? Okay, Dennis, well, thank you, and we'll probably
Thank you.
hear from you next meeting, no doubt.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, the last item is the monthly Director David Cool update as to what's going on in the city. David?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. David Cool, not Dennis Cool here.
Well,
Just want to give you a little rundown on what the council's been working on, things that you have seen before. The first one is the public hearing they approved, Ordinance 1950. That was the Housekeeping Ordinance, some of which dealt with things such as the accessory dwelling unit restrictions that would take away the requirement to require someone to live on the property. And so that one went through, but they did keep two sections out of Ordinance 1950. The sprinkler ordinance that would have required sprinklers in attached units, as well as some existing building code language that's in our Oak Harbor Municipal Code. So we're going to study that a little bit more and bring that back in a workshop with Fire Chief Merrill and Building Official Ginger Pennington. So they asked for a little more clarification on that, and we'll come back and talk about that soon. Also, the public hearing on the stormwater manual, that was approved, so now we have the 2019 stormwater manual official here in the city, as well as something you're going to see coming up that Blaine will be talking about. That's the council retreat, where they set up the goals and prioritization of what they wanted to work on. And that's going to be July 12th this year. Current planning is the one thing that you've given up as a review body, and so we like to sometimes touch on a couple of those items so you can see what's happening in town. The Crosby Villa development is 4 buildings with 15 units in each building on Crosby near Heller Street. That is just getting started in review, and that's the one that's going through rezoning right now and is just about complete. The Cedar Hill subdivision out on Crosby as well is 28 lots, and we're currently reviewing their drawings, moving that one forward. And the Marion Woods project, which has been around a long time. They're putting in all their infrastructure and on Swantown, and that's about 46 lots. And we anticipate once they get all their infrastructure in, then they'll probably process a final plat sometime soon. In the building world, Scenic Heights has 3 homes under construction. That's the one proposed by Pacific North Group. And they also have one more that has also gotten a permit just recently. So now we have 4 homes going up at the Scenic Heights development. The new commercial occupancy we recently saw was the Whidbey Island Crafters Market and Studio downtown, as well as the Habitat for Humanity has gotten an occupancy for one of their duplexes. So we've seen a lot of activity across the board in different commercial as well as multifamily and some single-family development. Long-range planning, which is what you work on, the SEPA exemptions is something we've had on our list for a long time, where the state law has changed, and that allows us to raise our SEPA exemption levels, which might be for a commercial site going from something like 9 parking spots up to maybe 30, or from a square footage of a building up to a much bigger building. That's something Dennis is working on, and he'll bring that back to you this year. The critical areas ordinance you just talked about. The active transportation plan, CAC touched on that tonight. That's a comprehensive plan docket item that he's working on. Annexations, CAC also does most of those for us, and he has a couple of 3 of those that he's working on. And density regulations, Ray Lindenberg is working on that, so he continues to march that forward, and that's going to be a real benefit, I think, to density in town and more affordable housing. And that's also one part of our housing action plan that we're implementing, and Dennis and I are both working to do some of that work this year. The other thing we continually remind you of is our new electronic permitting system continues to advance. We're making changes all the time, making things more efficient. For instance, we had a certain section in our new permitting system for mechanical permits, things like water heaters. Well, the system was forcing us to attach floor plans in the system for a water heater. And we said, well, that's dumb. We shouldn't have to make an applicant upload a floor plan for a water heater. So we took several documents out that the system was forcing applicants to submit. And so we're simplifying things every day. And we'll continue to do that throughout the rest of the year. The last item is the Planning Commission meeting of July 26, 2022. CAC asked me to let you know about an upcoming project that we're moving forward quickly. And that is a text amendment on height. And so normally we do a study session before you do a hearing, but in this case, we're going to go straight to hearing. So we hope you'll take a look at that before the hearing and call us if you have questions. Call CAC with clarifications so that we can continue to keep that on track, because that's moving forward to council fairly soon after that. So I appreciate your time and attention, and Blaine has something to add.
Can I add one more issue here, David, regarding the council issue here? We did have the Whidbey Island Land Trust that made a presentation to the council regarding conservation easement proposals from property on SR 20 just south of Waterloo. And it's in our joint plan. Part of the trust was in our joint planning area. Given the proximity to the city and the potential growth, and on RS 20, the council made a position to direct staff to officially oppose write a letter from the mayor to officially oppose that the development. Certainly, we hope that the land trust will work with us and come up with a compromised issue here. But as it stands right now, we're taking critical property that's contiguous to our water utility and very close to our city limits. The council went ahead and made the decision to oppose the proposal to support that grant, and we're actually in opposition to the grants that they have, and will recommend that the legislature not approve them unless they get changed.
Thank you, Blaine. Is there any other, Commissioner, do you have anything else for the good of the order? Any questions, comments? If not, I close the meeting.